Hi, my name is Todd Galassi, and my research topic was the effects of the Russian winter on the German war effort during World War II. Just to start out, why I picked the topic, I had a general interest in World War II. I always have, ever since I was little. Just really like learning about it. I knew about like the winter affecting, like a little bit in a sense, affecting the Germans in the Eastern Front. What I was looking for is what really what with the soldiers was going on, and what with the strategies was affecting the war. And one of the actually main reasons I picked is when I was in high school, one of my teachers said you could write a dissertation on the effects of the winter on the war. A dissertation, you probably write a research paper on it, so that topic. In the beginning, Hitler and his forces were sweeping across Germany using the tactic Blitzkrieg, which is like a lightning war. He was taking out many regions and dominating all over the place. And he thought the Russians could be taken within, I believe it was 6 weeks before the winter could hit. So on June 22nd, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, which was the attack on the Soviet Union. So he was coming pretty close to Moscow. He came within 60 miles of the city. And Joseph Stalin, who was the leader of the Soviets at the time, his people were beginning to flee because they were very scared of all the Nazis that were coming towards Moscow. And what he did was he gathered his people, gave a rousing speech, and gave them a motivational speech. And he was able to get them to stay and to fight. And once the battle began, the Germans were pretty started to find out that the winter was, too much to handle. Since they thought they could win before the winter came, they didn't have any winter coats, so they were pretty unprepared. In the winter itself, it was daily temperatures dropped as low as 40 below during the fights. It was some 100,000 cases of frostbite were reported by the end of 1941, resulting in 15,000 limbs being amputated. Fighting in the cold, along with fighting the Russians, the Germans were recorded about 760,000 casualties alone. The name Siegfried Knapp, I believe it is, he wrote a book just detailing his life as a soldier in the German army, and he mentioned the fighting in the Russian winter. Let me see what he says here. He said the snow blew horizontally in blizzards that sometimes lasted all day long, with wind piercing our faces with 1,000 needles. The cold numbed and deadened the human body from the feet up until the whole body was an aching mass of misery. Each man fought the cold alone, pitting his determination and will against the bitter winter. The cold was quite simply a killer. We were all in danger of freezing to death. As you can see here on the bottom left, this guy's got frozen eyebrows, and on the right, he's not waving at you, he's just frozen to death. In the Soviet counterattack, they used the winter to their advantage. They mounted it in late spring, and even though snow was melting, it kind of slowed down the Russians. By this time, the Germans could not push back against them, and they were able to take the Germans out of Moscow. And next came the thaw in the springtime. Now, you can see that, look at this, without the winter. During this time, the Russians lost many battles. They lost two battles in the Crimean port of Sevastopol and the fall of Rosta on Don, which they were industrial cities, and the Germans came within a couple miles of the oil fields of Baku, which fueled the Russian war machine. So if the Germans were to take these fields, the Red Army would no longer have a chance to defeat the Nazis. So it came down to this. Joseph Stalin put up a not a step backwards decree that meant that every Russian had to fight no matter what, and if he failed to fight, he would be shot by his own people. So this led both armies to Stalingrad, was an industrial center off the Volga River in Russia. This is where some of the most brutal fighting was seen. seen during the war. It was hand-to-hand combat throughout the city mostly. Well, Hitler's mistake that I have posted there. He was pushing towards the middle of the city, and while he was doing that, the Russians moved out and they formed an iron ring around the city, so it entrapped the Germans within the city. And with this, they were short of supplies and their rations were cut. They were actually left to eat horse meat. There's approximately 250,000 Germans were trapped within Stalingrad. And at this time, the winter came back, which you can see with a couple, excuse me here. With the lack of food and the lack of warmth and everything, that it was beginning to kill the Germans more. And there was a thing called the Heart of the Sixth Army, which when they thawed a couple bodies and looked at what was going on, because a couple soldiers were just dying for no reason, they found out that their bone marrow was, instead of being like a healthy yellow or red, was actually a glassy fluid, and that their heart was small and brown is because that they're actually just dying from starvation, and it was killing them as effectively as the Russians themselves. So now they're dealing with the Russians shooting at them, but not eating is killing them. And along with this, they have to deal with the 40 below temperatures. Let's see here. In the turning point, the Russians were able to push back many panzer divisions, the tank divisions of the Germans, and with winter in full spring their swing, they were able to take them out and push them back, and then the Russians started moving west, taking out German airfields. They took out one called Potomnik Airfield, which ended the aerial defense for the Germans over Stalingrad. And then they kept moving, and they took out another one called Gumrak Airfield, which completely isolated the German soldiers within Stalingrad. This left them with no hope at all to fight. They said there was now more than 20,000 wounded inside the pocket, with an equal number of men too sick or malnourished to bear arms. A sense of hopelessness pervaded the highest level in the entrapped army. And like I said earlier, there was 250,000 men trapped within the city. After the battle and after the world, only 6,000 men ever made it home. And after this, it was a turning point, because after this battle, the Russians started moving towards Berlin. And that picture on the top right is a pretty famous picture of a Russian soldier raising the Soviet flag over Berlin in 1945. These are my references. But to conclude on my research, it's pretty clear that the winter had a big effect on soldiers and their fighting. And you can see once the winter went away, that the Russians started to lose a little bit more. But once the winter came back, that's where they gained their strength. And with the conclusion, you can say, it's not a direct, but maybe a little bit of indirect correlation of the Russians defeating the Germans. And yeah, that's my topic.